Tonight, we begin with breaking developments on the burgeoning efforts to oust Kevin McCarthy from his role as Speaker of the House. This morning, far-right Republican Matt Gaetz vowed to file a so-called motion to vacate. That is a move to evict the Speaker, and he says he's going to do that in the coming days, saying, quote, "I think we need to rip off the Band-Aid. I think we need to move on with new leadership that can be trustworthy." According to Politico, some House conservatives predict there are at least a dozen GOP members ready to support a so-called motion to vacate against McCarthy. And now, at least two progressive Democrats have indicated their support as well. Shortly after the announcement from Gaetz, Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said that she would, quote, "absolutely vote for a motion to vacate." Ocasio-Cortez left the door open to negotiations if McCarthy came to Democrats for help, but also said, quote, "it is not up to Democrats to save Republicans from themselves, especially." And just hours ago on this very network, Congresswoman Ilhan Omar also endorsed a motion to vacate.
I can't wait to take the vote to vacate. You know, I think it's not a surprise to anyone that McCarthy and I have our own issues, but it is essentially an issue of governance. We know that McCarthy has not been able to contain his conference.
Now, it should come as no surprise that Matt Gaetz is leading this effort, as we said. And Gaetz has been a thorn in McCarthy's side since before McCarthy actually won the speakership back in January. Gaetz repeatedly refused to back McCarthy during the speaker's race. And when he finally did, he squeezed several concessions out of McCarthy. And one of those concessions was lowering the threshold for filing a motion to vacate to just one House member. So after months of dangling the threat over McCarthy's head, Gaetz says he is ready to move. Here is McCarthy responding to that threat just this morning.
You know, this is personal with Matt. Matt voted against the most conservative ability to protect our border, secure our border. He's more interested in securing TV interviews than doing something. He wanted to push us into a shutdown, even threatening his own district with all the military people there who would not be paid, only because he wants to take this motion. So be it. Bring it on. Let's get over with it, and let's start governing.
All right, so let's be clear here for a moment. Regardless of what happens this week with the motion to vacate, Kevin McCarthy is losing control of his party. There's no doubt about that. The warfare is now open. After all, it was the GOP that almost caused the U.S. government to shut down. When the House finally passed a stopgap spending measure, it was because Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries corralled almost the entire Democratic caucus to support the bill. 90 hardline Republicans voted against the deal, despite a shutdown being just hours away. That means they were okay with it. And now with McCarthy's fate as Speaker on the line, it seems that Democrats may have to come to the rescue yet again, or they may have to cut McCarthy loose once and for all. Joining me now to break all of this down, Tara Setmeyer, Lincoln Project Senior Advisor and former GOP Communications Director, Jennifer Rubin, Washington Post opinion writer and an MSNBC political analyst. Ladies, it's great to have both of you with us. Tara, I'll start with you. I mean, now that the shutdown has been averted, the chaos surrounding Speaker McCarthy is on full display. It is front and center. How much of this political future now rests in the Democrats' hands to save Kevin McCarthy?
Oh, the irony.
Right.
If you would have asked me whether a Republican Speaker of the House would have to rely on the Democrats to save his speakership, I would tell you we were living in an alternate universe. But I guess we are in the era of Trumpism. Kevin McCarthy has never really had control of the caucus. Remember, it took 15 rounds for him to get the gavel in the first place. So he's been an impotent speaker since the day he got the gavel. This was inevitable. We knew that at some point this was going to come to a head. And this personal beef between Gaetz and McCarthy, a lot of it is performative for Matt Gaetz. He's not exactly the pillar of political integrity here. Neither is McCarthy, but for different reasons. Matt Gaetz is a political nepo baby. He's a spoiled brat. He likes to preen and gain attention. He's not a serious person. And I think that McCarthy actually this time may be outmaneuvering Matt Gaetz. There's a lot of drama around this, yes, and it further weakens him as speaker, but I ultimately don't think they can oust him. Who's going to replace him? That's the only reason why McCarthy felt emboldened to move forward with this, having to partner with the Democrats. The Democrats are sitting back laughing at this, going, oh, okay, whatever, we have a lot of hands here to play. That's on you guys. But I think that they couldn't find, the Republicans couldn't find someone as an alternative to McCarthy, which is why he went forward with this. He knew, go ahead, call the vote. Right. Who's going to replace me? Nobody wants that job. So I think that's what we're looking at here. That's why they're calling their bluff. And then if it happens, Matt Gaetz loses even more credibility, and I'm not quite sure where his merry band of kooks go after this ploy.
So, Jennifer, it seems like the possibility of a motion to oust McCarthy could really be an opportunity for the Democrats because at the end of the day, they could extract some concessions from McCarthy for him to retain his job if you get some Democrats to get him across the threshold and keep him as the Speaker of the House. And in some ways, you would be making Hakeem Jeffries as the de facto Speaker of the House. And some people have said Kevin McCarthy, as of yesterday, is Speaker in name only.
Well, the problem with making a deal with Kevin McCarthy is he can't keep any of them. So he could promise the moon and the stars to Democrats, and it would be worthless. It would be worthless coming from him. It would be worthless coming from anyone else. So I agree entirely. You let the Republicans stew around this, figure this out. They can knock themselves out trying to find a replacement. Ultimately, they won't. There's now rumbling that they're going to try to expel Matt Gaetz based upon criminal investigation that is going on that led to an ethics investigation. So this is what you get when you elect Republicans. And this is one big, long ad for Democrats for 2024. This is what you get. So I think at this point, there are only three things we know. One, McCarthy never keeps his word. Two, McCarthy doesn't control his caucus. And three, the motions to vacate, I think, are pretty empty. So when you put all that together, Democrats, I think, just wash their hands of this and let them play it out. And they're going to have to do the same thing over and over again, no matter who's in that seat. And that is keep the country running, keep the wheels on the bus, and hope for the best.
Let me ask you, Tara, about AOC and Ilhan Omar and whether or not it was a bit premature for them to come out and say that they would vote to vacate McCarthy. First of all, what do you think of them coming out and saying that? I mean, is it smart politics or not so smart politics? What kind of split do you anticipate among Democrats when it comes to ousting Kevin McCarthy?
Well, you always have that progressive left-wing faction, and they operate basically in their own island a little bit on some of these things. We saw some of that when Nancy Pelosi was Speaker of the House, and she had to rein them in a bit. So for them, that works for their constituency, and so there's only a handful. I don't think that Speaker Jeffries, Minority Leader Jeffries, see, it's in the zeitgeist already. I don't think that he's too worried about some of their comments because that's what they do. So I'm not really as concerned about that. But what I think he needs to be more concerned about are the Democrats who are in districts that are swing districts. He's probably going to tell his caucus they can vote based on their district. This is going to be a vote of conscience. I don't know that they're actually going to come up with a strategy to, quote, save Kevin McCarthy necessarily. This is the same guy that opened up an impeachment investigation, a sham impeachment investigation inquiry into President Biden. Right. So I don't know how much goodwill there actually is here. This is not like the relationships, decades ago of old here. So They have a couple of plays.
Good point. Jennifer, let me get your thoughts, not on the dynamic relationship between Kevin McCarthy and Matt Gaetz. We know how that is playing out, obviously, with the personal animosity between the two of them. But more importantly, Donald Trump and Kevin McCarthy, because in doing what he did, Kevin McCarthy and kind of bucking Matt Gaetz, he's also bucking the MAGA extremists within his caucus. And they answer to Donald Trump, which means to some extent, Kevin McCarthy on this singular issue went against Donald Trump. Donald Trump wanted a government shutdown. He made that clear in all of his social media posts, and yet he did not get the government shutdown.
Well, I think Kevin McCarthy blows with the wind because Donald Trump blows with the wind. When Donald Trump wants an impeachment proceeding, he gets that. When he was telling them to shut down, frankly, Kevin McCarthy for weeks was exactly where Matt Gaetz was. He didn't decide that he was going to be a responsible adult until yesterday, when he finally decided he was going to put a bill on the floor. So at times, I think he acts in what he thinks will be a way that pleases Donald Trump. Donald Trump has probably gone on to something else at this point. Donald Trump hasn't said anything that he's gravely disappointed the government is still operating. As we'll, I'm sure, talk about later in the show, he's on to his next trial. So I don't think this is going to cause any rift between the two of them. But in point of fact, Donald Trump continually leads Kevin McCarthy around by the nose and into a cul-de-sac. So he has become the weakest, most pathetic speaker, in large part because he's not his own man.
Yeah, that's a very good point, probably in modern American history. I got to ask you, Tara, Democratic Senator John Fetterman released a statement Friday criticizing the state of Congress. He wrote, quote, "I voted yes tonight to keep the government open, but I am done normalizing this dysfunction." I had a chance to ask yesterday on this program Senator Jeff Merkley and others about whether or not the process by which these spending bills and others needs to be reformed, given the way our politics and our hyper-partisanship has become. And it's not to equate both sides here. Republicans can hold Congress hostage, but the question is, does the process need to be reformed, maybe to something, you know, biannually as opposed to every year, in order to not face this, you know, death threat of a government shutdown every year?
I think it needs to rest with the American people. The voters need to send better people to Congress. That's the bottom line here. We can't keep changing our system because there are awful members of Congress who are negligent in their duty and their oath of office. I think the American people need to start paying attention and making a decision if this is what they want to continue to go on in their House of Representatives. I mean, we haven't passed in normal order the 12 appropriation bills since 1997. So this is a problem. It has gone on, you know, year after year after year. It's used as a political tool and political brinkmanship over and over again. And people's lives are at stake. People's livelihoods, our government, our governance is at stake. So I don't know if we need to change the system per se. I just think that there needs to be consequences for the bad behavior, and that rests with the American people at the ballot box.
All right, Tara, Jennifer, please stick around. I'm going to come back.
Spending cuts from 30 to 80%. That would have been devastating for millions of Americans. They failed again. They failed again, and we stopped them. But I'm under no illusions that they'll be back again.
All right, so that was President Biden earlier today. House Republicans, led by Kevin McCarthy, for now have just 6 weeks to get their act together and pass a long-term funding bill. Joining me now is Democratic Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury of New Mexico. Congresswoman, it's great to see you again. Thanks for coming back on the show. Let's start by talking about what the near future could look like for Speaker McCarthy. Would you support a motion to vacate him? And do you think this is an attempt by Republicans to distract from the broader chaos within their party?
Well, it's absolutely an effort to distract from the complete lack of leadership and chaos that's happening within their party. But I do think there are factions within the Republican conference that genuinely do want to take the speaker out. But, you know, my message for McCarthy is it's not our circus and he's not our clown. We stand united behind Hakeem Jeffries to be the next speaker. And, you know, it's not up to Democrats to bail him out. He's got to work it out within his own conference. We don't even know what kind of procedural motions may come to the floor in the coming days or weeks, but it's really up to him to figure out how to manage his conference and for the members of that conference to have legitimate, serious leadership that's able to govern this country.
Let me ask you about the short-term spending bill. Obviously, it does not include funding for Ukraine. That gave Democrats on the Senate side at least some pause there for a moment, but the White House is focused on turning that around before mid-November. Earlier today, President Biden said to stop playing games and actually get it done. What would you like to see moving forward? What does getting it done look like in the short term?
Yeah, I mean, we need to bring a bipartisan effort to the floor very quickly to fund our aid to Ukraine. It's very clear that Ukraine needs continued military support in its efforts to push back against the Russian invasion. And it's important for our democracy. I think what a lot of people need to understand is that this isn't just about Ukraine and the safety and the sovereignty of that country, which of course is very important, but it's about the survival of Western democracy. And and American engagement and support for Ukrainian efforts is vital to the future of global democracy. So we need to get a resolution to the House floor quickly and get that aid to Ukraine.
Of course, we recently saw the, plenty of other Republican manufactured chaos, and perhaps most notably the House Oversight Committee holding its first impeachment inquiry hearing into Biden. I was actually struck by some of the comments that you made, and I want to play just a brief part of your remarks from that hearing.
Let's be clear about what this hearing actually is. It's an effort to undermine our democracy, to diminish Donald Trump's own 2 impeachments. This is not a serious inquiry. This is not a serious hearing. In fact, the witnesses here don't even believe there's enough evidence to impeach.
And you also, at the end of that clip, which we cut out, but you pointed to the fact that members of the Republican Party did not even attend that hearing. So you really undercut a lot of their argument. But I just wanted you to expand on the first part of your remarks there, the part about this is a threat to our democracy and how it poses such a threat.
Yeah, well, it's very clear that this fake impeachment hearing is all about Donald Trump. It's very clear when you follow the evidence that Donald Trump called for an impeachment inquiry. He's very clear on his own social media posts that the reason why he wants this impeachment is to undermine the justice system, which is investigating him for criminal activity. It's part of his own efforts to undermine his political opponent in the 2024 election. And so in that way, it is part of Donald Trump's continued criminal pattern of trying to use our democratic institutions to put forward his own political agenda. And after we saw the 2020 election, his efforts to foment an insurrection in the Capitol and to steal an election, I think that it's very chilling. It's part of his continued pattern to undermine our democracy and fair and free elections and to use the resources of the government to do so.
How does the road ahead look for Republicans who are trying to push this evidence-free inquiry? Do you think it will actually have a political cost, or do you think that they and their constituents in their districts are so siloed off from the reality of America and what Americans really want from a governing party that it will not have any political consequence for them?
You know, I think it's clear that there is a portion of the GOP's base that is, as you say, very siloed off from broader media coverage. But I think that what was on full display in the 6+ hours of that hearing was a complete lack of evidence and seriousness. In fact, what was particularly strange about the hearing is that their own star witness, in his opening statement, in the first few minutes of his statement, said, I do not personally believe that there is sufficient evidence to meet the standard of impeachment. And, you know, I was like, okay, great, let's gavel and get this thing over with. Why are we even holding this hearing?
Yeah, I was going to say.
So, I think it was very evident that they don't have evidence. Yeah,
sorry, not to speak over you. I just meant to. It's crazy to think that Jonathan Turley, who has become the darling of everything the Republicans want to do with any legal justification, is literally coming out and saying, I don't think this actually raises to the level of impeachment inquiry. Congresswoman Melanie Stansbury, it's always a pleasure. Thank you so much for making time for us this week. I know it's been very busy for you.
Thanks for having me.
Coming up, Donald Trump's civil fraud trial kicks off tomorrow morning. Is this the beginning of the end of his business empire? But first, my friend Richard Louie is here with the headlines. Hey, Richard.
Eamon, good to see you. Some of the stories we're watching for you this hour. The late Senator Dianne Feinstein will lie in state at San Francisco City Hall Wednesday, where visitors will be able to pay their respects. A funeral service will be held the following day and will not be open to the public. Feinstein died on Thursday. She was 90 years old. Illinois residents are being allowed back home following cleanup from an ammonia spill. That spill was caused by a deadly crash involving a tanker truck about 2 hours south of Chicago. 5 people, including 2 children, died in that crash. And birthday wishes are pouring in for Jimmy Carter, who turns 99 today. The former president and first lady stayed at their home, but many of the family, including 12 grandchildren and 14 great-grandchildren, celebrated with community members down the block in downtown Plains, Georgia.
Breaking tonight, NBC News confirms that New York Attorney General Letitia James will attend the first days of Donald Trump's civil fraud trial, which begins tomorrow morning. NBC has also learned that Trump plans to attend at least the first 2 days, setting up a possible face-off between the two. Late last week, in a surprising pretrial ruling, Judge Arthur Engoron struck Trump a heavy blow, finding him liable for fraudulently overvaluing his assets, stripping him of control of his New York properties. That decision validated the heart of Letitia James's case. Now, as part of his ruling, the judge canceled the business certificates of all of the defendants, which include the Trump Organization itself and numerous LLCs connected to the company. Engoron's ruling didn't resolve all of the claims in James's lawsuits, with the judge saying there are disputed factual issues related to other claims that require a trial. So here is where we are. And now we have just learned of the names on Letitia James's list for witnesses in this trial. Among them, Donald Trump, Don Jr., Eric Trump, and Ivanka Trump, former Trump Organization CFO Alan Weisselberg, and Trump's former fixer, Michael Cohen. MSNBC legal analyst Barbara McQuaid joins me now, and Tara Setmeyer and Jennifer Rubin are also back with us. So, Barbara, I'll start with you. Between the appeals court ruling against his attempts to delay and the Manhattan judge ruling that he did indeed commit fraud, do Trump and his co-defendants even have a chance of escaping accountability at this point, or is the writing on the wall?
Well, I think the writing's on the wall, Eamon, and I think the question really is, what does that writing say? What are the dollar values? How much is at stake here? And so what the judge found was that Donald Trump had overvalued his assets to the tune of $2.2 billion at the largest margin. But the devil's in the details. And so some of the things they're going to do this week is to try to figure out exactly how much these assets are actually worth. So I imagine we'll see expert witnesses, people who are experts in financial valuation, as well as some of the people you just named, who will figure out the actual value of these assets. But it was clear to the judge, who said this case can be decided on the documents alone, that these assets were overvalued in gross proportions.
Why do you think, Barbara, Donald Trump is coming tomorrow? And why also Letitia James?
I don't know. You know, neither one of them is likely to have a speaking role. And so there may be some symbolic value there. You know, from time to time, when the leader of an office has a big case that is being handled by her office, I think she wants to show up for moral support of her people. I also think she wants to show up to make sure the message is sent to the judge that she backs this case, she understands it, and just to watch and see what's going on. I doubt she'll have a speaking role because the people who've worked on this case are the ones likely to do it. Similarly, I can't imagine Donald Trump's lawyers wanting him to have a speaking role in this case. If I were the lawyers, I would keep him as far off stage as possible, as we saw the lawyers do in the E. Jean Carroll case. But again, you know, I think part of Trump's political strategy is to portray himself as the victim and talk about grievance. And so by being there, perhaps he puts some ammunition into that strategy.
Perhaps selling more merchandise. Who knows at this point? Jennifer, we know that Trump is being accused of making more than 200 misleading estimates of his company's finances. Attorney General James is seeking $250 million in damages, in addition to barring the Trumps from ever serving as officers and directors in any New York company. That is pretty consequential for a family that has built their entire empire right here in New York.
It certainly is. Trump's entire identity is wrapped up in his name on those iconic buildings and the money he derives from them. So in a strange way, this may hurt him more than the criminal trials, which he continues to think will go his way, rightly or wrongly. But this really strikes at his wallet, which he values more than anything. And Barbara is right. We really don't know the extent of this, which specific properties are going to be at issue. If he can't run them, can other members of the family run them? If they can't, what happens to the properties? Do some of these properties need to be liquidated in order to pay for that $250 million penalty? So there's lots of questions and lots of details. But, you know, one of the risks of Donald Trump showing up in court is he can be called to the stand. Now, he will probably take the Fifth Amendment, but he chose not to take the Fifth in one of his depositions, so that may not work. And and then it can get really dicey. He can once again be in the position of perjuring himself, or perhaps giving information to the prosecution that he doesn't think is hurtful, but really is.
Barbara, how likely is it that Letitia James could get the penalties that she is seeking here?
Oh, I think it's highly likely. I don't know what the numbers will be. That'll be some of what it gets litigated this week. But I think the finding of fraud by the judge means that she's already won. The question is just by how much.
Tara, the New York Times writes this case strikes at the heart of Trump's identity, as Jennifer was also saying. What catapulted him onto the what catapulted him onto the mainstream was this image that he was this New York tycoon. And so I guess, how would he even spin this? How would he be able to recover from this if it is, as Jennifer was saying, this is ultimately stripped away from him?
Well, I think he's laid the foundation over the last 7 years as the victim. His entire identity now is all about grievance. So the people who follow him, they're not going to look at this now and go all of a sudden, oh, he's actually a fraud, a liar, and a loser. They're not going to see the light all of a sudden because a judge found evidence in a case, because Donald Trump doesn't believe in our legal system, and his followers don't believe in our legal system either. They think everything is rigged against Donald Trump, which is part of the reason why he's such a dangerous entity, because he has undermined our democratic institutions. And this is a perfect example of that. I mean, Donald Trump has been a professional fraud his entire life and a terrible businessman. I'm from New Jersey. I remember what he did to Atlantic City. I remember when it was found that he owed $70 million to 253 subcontractors just for the Taj Mahal. That was just one casino when it went bankrupt. I mean, he is, I remember that's the same guy that bragged on 9/11 how now that the Twin Towers have fallen, his building is the tallest in downtown. There's something sick with him with this, but it doesn't make a damn bit of difference to his followers. Now, of course, we at the Lincoln Project know how to do our audience of one strategy, and we have an ad coming out called Broke that will be targeting him in New York and in Mar-a-Lago, striking to the heart of this, reminding him that his empire is falling apart, and we know that will drive him crazy because he's so insecure about that. All he has is that facade. And in a general election, I think for the people who aren't in the cult, this strikes to the heart of what he deserves. This is just desserts. Something that is decades in the making, where he's finally held accountable for all of the vexed litigation he's been through, and for the fact that he has swindled so many people for so long. It's about time there's some accountability.
Barbara, I want to turn to the case in Georgia, and it was a week of legal setbacks for Trump in that election interference case. You had Scott Hall becoming the first defendant to enter a plea in the case. He was a bail bondsman accused of willfully tampering with electronic voting machines in Coffee County during the 2020 election and working with other co-defendants, including pro-Trump lawyer Sidney Powell. A big unanswered question here is really going to be how much did he interact with both Trump and Giuliani? Do you think people in Trump world are scared of him now agreeing to testify, or at the very least concerned about what him flipping means?
Yes, I think they must be very concerned for two reasons. One, whatever testimony he himself can provide, but also the domino effect that often happens. Once that first defendant falls, so often other defendants start thinking, wow, I better think about my strategy as well. He got in the door. He got a pretty good deal. The longer I wait, the worse my deal is going to get. Should I be pleading guilty too? I can imagine that the other 18 defendants this weekend were talking with their lawyers about whether they ought to be pleading guilty. But this defendant certainly was working closely with Sidney Powell, and so likely has testimony valuable in the case against her. There's also been reporting that on January 2nd of 2021, when all that crazy stuff was going on at the White House, he had a 63-minute phone call with Jeffrey Clark, the DOJ official. And so he clearly has information about that phone call as well. So he could be a real key person here to the entire case falling apart against these other defendants.
Jennifer, your take on this Scott Hall flip?
Well, I think Barbara's absolutely right. What happens is he then is in a position to give very damaging testimony against Sidney Powell. And so she decides, well, now I need to make a deal. And she gives more damaging testimony against the rest of them. So this is how it works. We've talked about going from the bottom up in an investigation. Well, it also works when you start flipping witnesses like this. I also think the other facts or the other developments last week that were harmful with Trump were more people were denied a chance to put their case into federal court. Now, Donald Trump has said he wants to stay in state court, but I think one of the gambits that he was counting on was maybe either getting lifted into federal court or enjoying some of the defenses that he thought would, that lawyers think would be better received in federal court. So really nothing has gone very well for him. And when you look back, it's hard to think of anything of consequence in any of these trials that he's won. And when he wins one, he gets overturned on appeal. So loser is an appropriate term both for his economic situation and his legal situation.
Tara, final thought to you. Donald Trump has given up his fight to try to move his Georgia case to D.C., and this comes 3 weeks after a judge also denied Mark Meadows' bid to have his case moved. Pretty big reversal for him. Why?
You know, it's interesting. I mean, I think that at this point they're just trying anything because he's in such legal jeopardy here. You know, and Mark Meadows, we hadn't seen him. I thought he was in the witness protection program for the last 2 years, and now we see where he is and how much trouble he's in too. And is he cooperating? I can't imagine Mark Meadows is going to go to jail for Donald Trump. Neither will any of the rest of these people because it gets real when you're looking at jail time. So there are so many aspects to these legal problems that Trump has that I think that his legal team is just really trying anything to navigate it. And I just don't see how they're going to be successful with any of them. So much of the evidence is so damning.
All right, Barbara McQuay, Tara Satmeyer, Jennifer Rubin, thank you to the three of you. Greatly appreciate it, as always. Coming up, our GOP...
Hello, xin chào tất cả anh em. Sau đây tôi sẽ giới thiệu cho anh em một cách và hướng dẫn cho anh em một cách để nuôi và chăm một chú gà chọi được khỏe và sung căng nhất có thể. Và sau đây là cách hướng dẫn của tôi và anh em cùng tôi chiêm ngưỡng chú gà của tôi nhé. Và đây là mặt mũi, mỏ. Cái này người ta gọi là, tôi gọi là tím mật, chân trắng. Thường thường người ta kỵ gà bạch đầu trí, nhưng mà tôi thì chả kỵ cái móng nào, đá hay là được. Ở đây tôi sẽ nhốt em nó vào bu. Và muốn chiến binh của mình khỏe mạnh nhất có thể là không thể nào thiếu phần thức ăn được. Thức ăn là một phần rất quan trọng. Sau đây tôi sẽ cho anh em hướng dẫn anh em cách để cho gà ăn không bị nấm họng hoặc là được tiêu hóa. Đây. Thành phần chính là thóc. Thóc thì mùa đông chúng ta có thể ngâm qua đêm được. Mùa hè thì có thể chúng ta vo sạch ngâm 3 đến 50 phút thì có thể đổ ra phơi khô ráo nước và có thể ăn được. Đây. Đó, chúng ta cho vào nước này. Quay nước. Đãi sạch hết chấu đi. Đãi sạch hết chấu đi. Đấy. Vo sạch như thế. Làm sạch như gạo mình ăn luôn. Đổ nước đi. Vo tầm 2 đến 3 lần. Thường thường như tôi nhà cho các chiến binh ăn xong là vo thì có thể vo được. Mình cứ căn bữa, mình vo từ sáng và mình cứ sát sạch đi như này. Đấy, làm từ sáng, xong là 30-40 phút sau. Thường thường là sẽ là sáng sớm, nhưng mà đây hôm nay tôi sáng tôi cho ăn hết rồi. Đây là tôi phải vo thêm. Và đợi một tí nữa thì là cho ăn. Làm như thế nào cứ mình cứ cho ăn mình làm một lần cho ăn 2 bữa, sáng tối, xong đêm hôm sau hoặc là sáng sớm hôm sau mình dậy mình lại làm như thế. Đấy, cho nó sạch hết chấu đi rồi. Nó ngâm như này 3 đến 50 phút. Đấy, ngâm như này 3 đến 50 phút. Nước trong như này ngâm đây 3 đến 50 phút là có thể đổ ra phơi khô cho gà ăn được. Muốn con gà của mình mà sung khăng đỏ khỏe thì không thể thiếu được một lọ mồi cóc như này. Đấy, đây là mồi cóc tôi đặt của anh Trương Lê. Đây, có mỗi ngày thường bây giờ mùa nóng tôi cứ cho ăn mồi này thì ngày nào mình phải cho ăn. Đấy, mồi này ngày nào mình cho ăn. Nhưng con này thèm mồi, nó nhìn thấy mồi là nó rình ra để nó mổ luôn. Đấy, nó cứ tìm được ra để nó mổ. Đấy, mồi cho ăn ngày ăn 2-3 viên được, mỗi ngày ăn 2-3 viên. Sáng mình cho ăn thóc xong thì tầm độ 9-10 giờ mình cho ăn mồi kèm theo rau giá cà chua để con gà nó được bổ sung. Ăn mồi này thì có khả năng nó sẽ rất nóng thì mình cho ăn thêm rau giá cà chua để cho nó hãm cái nóng ấy nó lại. Ăn mồi này thì gà cực kỳ sung căng đỏ khỏe, với cả nhanh vào cốt con gà. Đấy. Nhiều anh em nuôi gà những con gà tơ như này là đã lôi đi cứ thế thử túi bụi rồi mà không cho nó khô khén lông lá là để nó thử sớm là con gà nó sẽ hỏng cốt sớm. Về sau là xương cốt nó bị như kiểu người anh thế, đấm nhiều vào một chỗ là nó đau. Thì đây con gà thì đánh nhiều vào là sẽ sau là nó sẽ giảm độ tải đi và lông lá nó sẽ bị hỏng. Trong khi đến lúc mà mình vần khai chậm rồi, bọn cùng tuổi của mình nó mới vần ấy, thì lông lá chúng nó đẹp, chúng nó nhìn thấy mình thì bụi mù lên là chúng nó sẽ bảo mình là gà già. Thế không nên. Đây như tôi thường tôi nuôi gà là 11 tháng 11 đến 12 tháng thì tôi bắt đầu tôi mới cho mở mỏ. Tầm đấy lông lá các thứ là vào cốt hết rồi thì nói chung là tầm đấy nó chỉ có ăn với nó nuôi lực của nó thôi, không phải nuôi lông với cả không phải nở xương nở cốt nữa. Vần tầm đấy thì nó sẽ ra đòn ra lối hơn, và con gà mình chăm hàng ngày thì nó cũng sẽ khỏe hơn. Đấy. Con gà tơ theo anh em thì cách chăm như thế là đã đủ chưa? Nếu mà thiếu thốn cái gì hoặc là cần suy nghĩ kinh nghiệm gì thì anh em có thể chia sẻ vào đây. Tôi có thể tôi học theo anh em, tại vì tôi cũng mới chơi gà nhưng mà gọi là nuôi về đam mê. Đấy, anh em là có kinh nghiệm và dày dặn hơn thì có thể chia sẻ vào đây để tôi học hỏi. Tất cả anh em vừa rồi đấy là tôi gọi là giới thiệu một phần là về chú gà tơ của tôi, với cả giới thiệu về lọ mồi cóc tôi đang dùng cho chú gà tơ của tôi ăn và cách thức cho ăn thóc hoặc là làm thóc sạch như vừa rồi. Rất cảm ơn anh em đã tìm và xem video của tôi. Hẹn anh em vào video sau, khi nào vần em này hoặc là tôi sẽ nuôi, tôi sẽ quay cho anh em xem hàng ngày em nó sẽ tiến bộ như thế nào. Chào anh em.